Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 260 of CryptoBiography, and it's going to be called Back Home. And the reason we've been doing so many compilation episodes, essentially, is because I have been away. And so what happened is, and this took quite a long bit of planning, we in this case being my wife, myself, and my mother. So we went to Europe for almost a month, and it was amazing. So here's sort of the background. My mom has done a fair bit of traveling. She and my dad both love to travel. However, shortly after my dad retired, that was when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Unfortunately, especially for him, one of his main issues with Parkinson's was lower body strength issues. So he had a hard time walking, and that pretty much made traveling all but impossible relatively quickly, even though he was around for many years with the disease. Many, but whatever. Anyway, so my mom now, hasn't, they did a fair bit of traveling while they were working, and then a short bit, after they were both retired. But she has not, there's plenty of places that she's not had a chance to go yet. In fact, she's only been to Ireland once, even though we have Irish family history there. The reason being, the last time she tried to go to North Ireland was in the 90s, and the Troubles had erupted. The Troubles are a sort of a whole period of history that lasted like 20, 30 years. But basically they bubbled up every once in a while, and it was basically fighting between the nationalists and the unionists. In other words, the ones who wanted there to be, a separate Ireland, and the ones who wanted North Ireland especially to continue to be part of the UK. And once in a while, those the Troubles have since ceased. They've been relatively peaceful for quite some time now. But when she happened to go was when the last time that the Troubles erupted. So she's never been to North Idaho, which is North Ireland. Sorry, I grew up in Idaho, so sometimes I say Idaho. North Ireland, which is where her family, and therefore my family has actually come from, County Down, basically. So just north of Dublin. And anyway, so she'd been to a couple other places in Ireland, but mostly southern Ireland. And she's never been to France at all. My wife had never been off of the North American continent, just even though she has a family who does a lot of traveling. That's not quite true. She has been, she has family in Australia, so she's been to Australia, but she's never been to Europe, and has hardly ever been off of North America except for the trip, or maybe it was 2 trips to Australia. And so she was really excited to go. So none of us had been to France. I had been to Dublin very briefly, years and years ago, but I've never really toured Ireland. So, so we toured Ireland. We went with a tour group in both, and then we had a couple of days sort of to do whatever, and we saw like the Museum d'Orsay and the Eiffel Tower, stuff like that weren't going to be part of the tour. I mean, on the tour, there was like a day, a bus tour of Paris, but it was just to see everything. So we weren't actually going to be going up the Eiffel Tower or anything. So we made sure to do that as a separate thing. Anyway, and I think, and I like the tour, and I think it was a good way to do it. And I think especially like the first time you go to a country, it's a good idea to do it that way. I would highly recommend it, especially, if it's a country, where you're not touring just to go to, beaches, or, not just to go see, pretty areas and just lie down in them. But if you're actually, interested in like a country because of its history or because of its architecture and so on, then doing it as a tour, I think, is a really, really good way to do it. Reason being, the tour, like, first of all, the tour guide is usually pretty knowledgeable. They'll have information to tell you about all the places you go. That was really helpful. But also they take care of all the tickets, all the parking, all, the getting in and out of the hotel, figuring out all kinds of stuff like that. And it just makes things so much easier, and also makes it so that you don't have to deal with all that stuff, which means you end up doing more stuff than you could ever do on your own, because you either wouldn't know about some of it, or it would just take longer because you're waiting in ticket lines, all that sort of issue. And all that's taken care of, and it's really great. So, I mean, if we went back, maybe we wouldn't do a tour, and we would just hit places that we knew we wanted to see again. But as it was, it was really wonderful to do it that way. So some of the highlights real quick before I start talking about other stuff. Some of the highlights, as a Star Wars fan, it was cool to see, the islands that they used in The Last Jedi. From a distance, we didn't get to go to the islands or anything. But on the mainland, you also have the same sort of, they're called beehive houses or beehive buildings. And you saw those in Last Jedi as well, where, and that's exactly what they look like. Those are very real. They're in the movie, but they are real. And the druids who built them also built some on the mainland, and we did get to see one of those up close, and it was very interesting being in a building that's 2,000 years old and human built, not a cave, not something that was sort of naturally there anyway, but actually something hand built by humans 2 millennia ago. It was amazing. And and there was just the Giant's Causeway in Ireland was amazing as well. It's sort of a geological formation, absolutely beautiful. We saw a lot of interesting castles. I saw Blarney, kissed the Blarney Stone, had almost a panic attack over it. It was, if you have any acrophobia at all, kissing the Blarney Stone feels very, very bad, and it did feel very, very bad. But I managed to do it. It took me I had to back off, and then I backed in and did it again on the second try. It feels like you're going way the hell down there, and it really feels like you could fall to your death, despite the fact that there's, people there and like railings to hold on to. There is, however, you're not strapped in. There's no harness. There's nothing to actually prevent you from falling. It's just heavy metal railings that you hold on to, and then kind of a beefy dude there who's meant to kind of hold onto your legs. But it feels like, I was wearing this jacket that felt like it had very little friction, and it just felt awful. Anyway, but it felt good to be done. I got it done, so it was all good. And by the way, Blarney Castle is beautiful and amazing too, because some of the other castles we saw on the trip were more like palaces. Like we saw Versailles in France and some other ones that felt more like, getaways for the wealthy. But Blarney Castle is not like that. It was very much a defensive castle, for sure. And I'm sure at the time it was also luxurious for it, compared to what you would have if you were, just a farmer or something. But yeah, it was amazing going up and these very steep stone steps that actually and towards the top it got very, very narrow and a little claustrophobic. I don't have claustrophobia, but even I felt like a little squeezed. And then you get up to the top and it's like, boom, you see everywhere around you, because, you're over 100 feet up or more. And of course, Ireland is all green because it rains so much, and it was just beautiful. We actually got a little bit lucky. We had a little rain at the cliffs of Moira, I think it is, which were beautiful even in the rain. And that was one of the few times it actually rained. Other than that, it was pretty nice, and we got a little bit lucky. And then France was beautiful. The Mont-St-Michel was sort of one of the big highlights for me. Versailles was interesting, amazing. The Musée d'Orsay was amazing. you just walk down the hallway and boom, there's Olympia, boom, there's Whistler's Mother, like some amazingly famous paintings are just there, and they don't even have like their own separate room or anything, or you know what I mean? They're not like if they were in America, like there would definitely be like a whole room and like some setup with like a bunch of, boards telling you the history of the painting and why it's important and where it's been, referenced in other bits and blah blah blah. No, it's just there's a bunch of other paintings that are nearly as famous, and then there's Whistler's Mother just in amongst them. It's kind of amazing. So that was the d'Orsay. The Eiffel Tower is as beautiful as you think it is, and it's much bigger than you think it is. Like, you kind of recognize that it's big, but you hear, okay, it's a little over 1,000 feet high. Okay, so that's pretty high. But until you get and you're underneath the darn thing, and you realize, okay, this thing really is enormous. It's like how amazing how old this thing is, and yet how big it is. And right now in France, because there's going to be an Olympics coming up, there's a lot of these big important structures are being sort of renovated. So, and of course, Notre Dame had its fire as well, so that's being renovated as well. We got to see it from a distance, Notre Dame, but it's just not the same. It was still a remarkable building, even from a distance, and even with parts of it being sort of like being worked on and sort of covered up because of it. Even just the parts you could see are still really remarkable. But like part of the Eiffel Tower was being renovated, parts of Versailles were being renovated, like practically everything, especially around Paris. Because I think that's going to be, that's just going to be one of the highlights for people to visit, when the Olympics come in a couple of years. So, but it didn't matter. Like everything was still really remarkable. For me, though, the highlight of France was Mont-St-Michel. If you look at it from a distance, it's like you see where sort of it became one of the highlights, or one of the reasons that Lord of the Rings, sort of the White City, got made the way it did, is because it looks like Mont-St-Michel, and it's just amazing going in through. You go under these tall walls in this place that half the time is surrounded by water, and you go up these narrow streets, and they go up, quite steeply, especially after the first, say, let's call it a block or so. All very narrow, all very medieval, with the sort of the medieval type of buildings and so on. And they're very careful about what sort of places are allowed to be in there. So there's no chain restaurants or anything like that. But anyway, you go up this steep little narrow road, and it just kind of zigzags back and forth, and then boom, there's the big abbey at the top. And the abbey is still a working abbey, but it's very much, you pay to go in and see everything. And it's a beautiful structure, amazing. Can't even imagine how they built this sort of thing, but yeah, and it was really cool. Just also, like I said, as an old D&D fan and all that, just going up and seeing how these defensive structures worked, and how the crenellations looked, and the little slits, not necessarily murder holes, but there's a different word for the slight slits that were just sort of just outside the walls, that they could still drop rocks or hot water down if they needed to, or just keep an eye on the enemy. And yeah, we had my mom, she's in her 70s. She didn't want to go all the way to the top, so she just saw the first lower bits of Mont-St-Michel. My wife and I saw the abbey and walked all the way around it. And then on the way back, we had dinner at the highest restaurant. On your way down from the abbey, it's the first place, and just incredible views. And when you see Mont-St-Michel is surrounded by this sort of silty flat plain that's almost perfectly flat, so when the tide comes in, it just rushes in. We sat down. There was nothing. There's no water. Like shortly after we sat down, the first little bits of water were sort of visible coming around the side of Mont-St-Michel, because we're still essentially on the hill, so you could only see halfway around roughly. You could see a little bit of water, and by the end of the meal, like it was an island again. It was just there was water all the way around. Pretty incredible. And yeah, but for me, a lot of times, when there's little differences, to borrow a phrase from Tarantino, it is sort of like the little things that are different there. They don't believe in water fountains. Like neither Ireland nor France had water fountains, like hardly anywhere. Like even in places you would expect them to have, like airports and stuff like that, it was really hard to find water. It's like they don't really believe in drinking a lot of water. I guess the ones who do believe in it have to carry around water bottles, I assume. You could buy bottled water, sort of, but even that was not always easy. But they don't. There's just not water fountains around. It was crazy. And even the couple times when there were, like we went to, what was it called? It was where it was on Normandy Beach, and they had the American cemetery there. And I don't know, I guess because it was partly designed by Americans, it had like bathrooms with actual like water fountains, but the water fountains didn't work. So even there just wasn't any, there was no water to be found. It was interesting. We were there shortly before the anniversary of D-Day, and it was actually on Memorial Day. And it was interesting being there because like, I think there was going to be some sort of ceremony later on. We were there a little too early for that. But like they had put down an American and a French flag in front of every marker. So there's like these little bitty, they're smallish, but because they're like the kind that's on a stick that's maybe a half a meter high at most, And it was really lovely. And yeah, it was just thousands and thousands of graves. Not all of them died on D-Day, of course. If you look at the dates, most of them were not on D-Day, but a lot of them died, within 1 to 2 weeks after D-Day. And it's just incredible, like how many of them are gone. And then the other interesting thing was we were there at the beach. You can look down, you can see the exact beach where the landing was. They got rid of everything from that period of time. Like there are none of the barriers, none of the like the pillboxes. I don't know. I had in my head that there would still be like some of the pillboxes or some of the other sort of structures from that period of time. They had cleared all of them away. I don't know when. Probably shortly after World War II, I would guess. They are all gone. Like, because in your head, you picture D-Day, you picture that, and those structures were pretty, substantial. They were made of concrete and steel and iron, and they are gone. It's just another beach now, except of course, no one can actually do anything on it. It's also it's a protected area. But we looked down on it, and it's like, yeah, there it is, and you could even tell, kind of, just in my head, I could tell from like the various movies and games and things that have been set there, you sort of recognize the curves and like how deep the water is and where it meets the shore and everything, and then how steep the hills are and everything. And yeah, it's there, but none of the buildings are. Yeah, what else? Versailles was really impressive too. I would say that was a highlight as well, even though it's very unusual just being in something that's like that expensive. It's like, wow, like no wonder, like, and it was in threat of being like destroyed by the French Revolution, because it wasn't that old at that period of time. Like it had been built just like by the couple kings before the French Revolution, but I think someone sort of high up in the revolution had the rather bright idea of turning it into a museum at that time, like during the revolution, so that it would actually save Versailles. Pretty incredible. Definitely worth seeing. Just unbelievable art everywhere. All the ceilings are painted, just like, kind of like the Sistine Chapel, with actual like all kinds of different styles of classical styles of art usually, but different like styles or subjects rather. Some of them were religious, some of them were like Greek mythology, some of them were French historical, all that sort of thing. Incredible. Anyway, so yeah, besides the water, the other thing is like, to a degree in Ireland, and then really to a high level in France, like they believe in having like late dinners, like nothing is even open before 7 for dinner. So if you're hungry early, or if you need to do something, or if you have to get to bed early because of blah blah blah, you're just not going to eat in a restaurant. There's just not open. And it's kind of the same with lunch too. Like a lot of places, like everything opens at noon, and a few places you could find maybe at 11:30, or if you're really lucky 11. But if you, like, we were on these tours and like we need to be back at the bus depending on, and I'm sure they tried to like arrange things to a degree, but you need to get certain things, and it just takes a certain time to get to the next one. And there were times when it was like we were just like hunting around for some place to actually eat before we had to be back on the bus. It was very interesting. You realize, like, in America, we just have like these restaurants that are just kind of open, and they have quiet spots, but they don't close the restaurants up. But they do in France, and they did in Ireland to a degree as well. It just wasn't as extreme, and like more places were open for like a slightly earlier dinner. Like 6 was really easy to find, and you could find a few places that were open at 5. But again, even in Ireland, they definitely like close things down between lunch and dinner. It's not like, like a lot of restaurants in the U.S., it's like they'll just kind of keep things open. They know that it's going to be quiet, but they just kind of keep it open. Not so in Ireland and France, at least. And I'm sure that's probably, from what I understand, that's sort of a common European thing as well. Anyway, we had an amazing time, and it was absolutely lovely. And but yeah, I don't know what else to say at this point. I am glad to be back. I have some ideas for stories, but I obviously need to sit down and get them written. So with any luck at all, I will be able to get some writing done, and we'll be back to a normal episode next week. Hope your early summer is going well. I guess, or is it technically summer yet? Technically not. It feels like it though. And anyway, so thank you for listening, and here we go. So, words and music, copyright 2022, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening.